Hello everyone, this is Orlando from A Collector's Dream. And today we're going to show some Cuban cards that were actually manufactured in Cuba. And not only are there just Cuban players in there, in some issues there are Negro League players. Because as you know, the Negro League players could not play in the United States. So many of the cards that are from the Negro League players are in Cuba when they played in Cuba. So I did a live stream with Sammy Thunder, and if you want to go ahead and check that out, and I talked a little bit about the history of Cuban baseball cards, and I showed some of my collection. So I'm just going to do a quick rundown and just a quick history of the cards that were actually made in Cuba. And you know, Cuba has had baseball since the 1860s, very similar to the United States. Originally, they started in it was two college students, the Cuban college students, that ended up bringing a bat and a ball back to Cuba and teaching them the game, because they played in college baseball here in the United States. So the Cuban League started, they started playing in the 1870s and 80s, and the official league started in the 1890s in Cuba with the Havana Club. And then the first cards produced were actually in 1909. And these were the Cabañas, or you can see the Cabanas cards. And these cards were made because the Detroit Tigers in 1909 went to play some of the Cuban teams in Cuba. And in those games, the Cuban team, made of the best players in Cuba, and some Negro League players actually beat the Tigers team, which in those days the Tigers were the American League champions. Now Ty Cobb did not go and play in 1909, but he did go in 1910. So this year, 1909, they produced the first cards, which were the Cabanas cards. And they're very, very similar to the tobacco cards, the cigarette cards, and they were in cigarette packs. And you can see in the back, it talks about the Cabañas, and it says it's the la mejor manera de formar un precioso collection, the best way of making a beautiful collection of the players of baseball and the clubs, the Cuban and the extranjeros, which is the strangers, or the people from other countries, which were the Americans that came and visited them. So it's the best way to collect these cards is to smoke the cigarros de Cabañas. So that's the back of these cards. Now, many of these cards, were actually put into albums, and that's why you see a lot of Cuban cards and also Venezuelan cards that were actually, have glue stains in the back. So this particular card is Esteban Prats. He was one of the big hitters back in the day for Cuba. He was a first baseman. And there were three different versions. They're the Almendares Club, which is the blue, the Havana Club, which are red, and then the Detroit Tigers team, which have a black circle around it. So I don't have any of those, but I do have a couple of the Almendares Club. And one of the best players in the Almendares Club was Armando Marsans. And Armando Marsans, along with Rafael Almeida, were the first two Cuban players to play in the major leagues. Since they were white players, they were allowed to play, and they were recruited by Cincinnati. And Cincinnati came there and recruited them. Now, Marsans was his family was very well off. They ran a tobacco plantation, and they had a lot of money. So Marsans actually studied in New York in college, and was very well versed in the language, in English, and he studied law. So he really knew the laws in the United States. And later went on to be really the first free agent ever. Before Curt Flood, before any of those guys, he was the first player to actually sue the league and to because he wanted more money, and he wanted to play in different teams. And in Cuba, of course the Negro leaguers, the black players and the white players played together. So it was very advanced back in those days, where some of the best Latin players and the best Negro League players played together. And that's the back of the Marsans card. Now, after this year, they produced also a 1910 Punch Cigarros card, which is another brand of cigarettes called Punch. And those are extremely rare. Those are 1910. I don't have any of those. But that does have a Ty Cobb card, because Ty Cobb did come and play against the Negro Leaguers and the Cuban players back in those days. So extremely rare, the 1910 Punch out of Cuba. And it includes a Ty Cobb card in there. In 1915, in Cuba, they produced what was called the 1915 Susini cards. And the Susini cards were produced in different series, and they had different, it was a non-sports and a sports cards. So as you see here, this is Jose Marti, who was the liberator of Cuba, liberated Cuba from Spain. And he's considered basically the George Washington of Cuba. So the first series, this is card number 79, the first series were celebrities. And some of the celebrities, that were famous at the time, plus the politicians and all. As you can see, this particular card also was one that was stuck onto an album and removed. And this is Jose Marti, basically the George Washington of Cuba. And here is the George Washington card from the 1915 Susini set. And again, this is card number 85, and it's part of the celebrities, which were the famous people at that time. And these cards were, again, cigarette cards from Susini cigarettes. And they had an album, as you can see. And it basically was to take these cards and stick them onto the albums. And a lot of the collectors, a lot of the cards back in Cuba, just like Venezuelan cards, they were made to be put into albums. So that's why you see them all very low grade for the most part. And they produced different series, and they did produce some sports cards also in the same Susini. And this is the 1915 Susini, the sports version. As you can see, Album Universal Sports. And this is a football card. And they produce not just football, but they produce baseball cards. And you can see this old scene of a football, playing football with leather helmets and no helmets back in 1915. And it does say football or rugby because it was similar, but Cubans really didn't know in 1915 a lot about it, but this is definitely a football scene. Of course, college football at that time. And you can see in the back, and that was the sports issue, which are the later series. And in these sports issues, there are some baseball cards in there. Again, they're extremely rare. And that's where you see cards of some of the top players, Negro League players that really could not or were not produced in the United States. And you see cards of, there's a card of Martin Dego, which he actually has the Hillsdale, the Negro League, the Hillsdale uniform on. And they're all action shots. So the Dego card, he's running to first base, and you can see the Negro League uniform he was wearing. A very rare card, very expensive card, so it's a tough card to come by. So those are the earlier cards, and then there's a few more, which again I don't have, but there were some other issues that were produced around that time, and I'll move on to the 1920s, and this is a Romeo and Julieta cigar card, and this is Elio Idalgo, and Elio Idalgo was one of the top players in Cuba, one of the Cuban players. He was the center fielder, and these cards are like most of the ones I've shown you here. they're kind of almost photographed, very similar to the Fatima cards or Fatima cards. And you can see it's kind of like a photo of the player, and it has kind of like a glossy type finish on there. And this card, even though it says circa 1922, it really wasn't a 1922. It was actually done before 1922. But the only company that grades this is CSG, because they, PSA and SGC can't really confirm the dates because these cards are pretty rare. But if you can see in the back, if you look at the stats, it shows his stats from 1915. And you can see there, Hidalgo, Habuco was kind of his nickname. Elio Hidalgo, center fielder from Andares. And it says series 1915. So these were produced before, you know, that era, but nobody really knows for sure exactly what date they were produced. That's why they're not graded by some of the major companies. But you see his batting average there, 31 games, 257 in his fielding average. And it says, Obsequio de los cigarros Romeo and Julieta. So they came in the cigarettes of Romeo and Julieta. Again, very, very rare cards printed in Cuba. And they're, you know, most of them are stuck to albums. And most of these, they're kind of one of a kind. I think this is the only one of Hidalgo that exists. And there's some other Cuban players and I guess Negro League players in these sets, which are, again, very, very rare, very, very tough to come by. There were some other sets produced during those days, which are pretty rare, and you know, I just don't have all of the cards from there. I'd like to get one of each there, but there's again Negro League players in there. And then in 1924, they produced the Aguilitas, which is another brand of cigarettes. And this is a 1924-1925 Aguilitas, Rafael Almeida. And you can see most of them, like this one, they're kind of actual photographs of the players. And Almeida was, along with Marsans, the first two Cuban players to play in the league with Cincinnati. And again, they played, since the weather was great in Cuba, they played baseball here in the United States, and then they went back to Cuba and played there in the Winter League. And the same thing happened with the Negro League players, where they played here, and then in the winter, they went to play in Cuba. So the Aguilitas card, this is from the 1924-25. There's a lot of cards in this set. You can see this number 855. And like most Cuban cards, they were stuck on albums. You can see the glue in the back of these. And you can see that they came from the series of artistic series of cigarettes from the Aguilita cigarettes. And that's where you can get it. It says you get them from your favorites. So this is the 1924-25 Aguilitas. Now the following years, Aguilitas also produced 1926-1927 Aguilitas. And you can see the difference in these. Much bigger picture. You know, this is Adolfo Luque, or Dolph Luque, as he was known here in the United States. And Adolfo Luque was the first real Cuban star in the United States. And he played many, many years here. It was really one of the great pitchers from Cuba that played here. And again, the back of these cards, you can see that you know, different series, producing different series. Also probably stuck in albums. This is card number 777. And extremely tough to find, extremely rare. Because again, the weather in Cuba, with the humidity and the heat, most of these cards, just like in Venezuela, they just didn't survive. Many were just stored in places where, you know, there were no basements or things like that in Cuba. So it's very difficult to get them in any type of condition. So that's the 26-27 Aguilitas. Again, there's other issues that were produced in the 20s and also in the 30s. And in the 30s, one of the issues that was produced in Cuba was the Baguette chocolate. And these, just like in the United States where you have candy issues, this was a candy issue. And they're very little cards, very small, probably one of the smallest cards out there. And this is the Adolfo Luque from the 1930 Cuban Baguette chocolate issue. And the backs of these cards, you can see they came with a little piece of chocolate. And it says, Chocolate Baguette, el más popular, the most popular. And they just came with a little piece of chocolate. And again, they were pictures for the most part of the player. And this is Adolfo Luque's Baguette chocolate card from 1930. And, just these cards just very, very tough to come by. And, like most of the Cuban issues, there are some Negro Leaguers in that era, in those cards. In the 40s, there were a few cards that were also produced in the 40s. And 1946, there were the Propagandas Montiel. And the Propagandas Montiel, there were two different kinds. There were some that, like this, that had the Cuban players. And then there were also some that had the players from the United States. And you'll see these where they had, Joe DiMaggio, Babe Ruth, Ty Cobb, and those were the Propagandas Montiel that were produced in 1946. And again, most of these were stuck on albums. You can see the back. This one was not stuck in an album, but you can see the back that it just talks about the cards. And these are very, very, very thin, very delicate cards, very easy to get damaged. A lot of them have holes because just the little bugs would eat them, because of the humidity and the way that they were stored. Many of these just didn't survive. And if they did survive, you won't find them in much more than a 1 or a PSA 1 or 2 condition at the most. So these are the Propagandas Montiel. And right around that time, they also produced the 1945-46 Caramelo de Portivo cards. And these are a little bit more well-known. They've become popular over the years. And these have also, again, Negro League players and Cuban players. And they have some of the superstars, both Negro League and the Cuban leagues, like Ray Brown and things like that. And this is one of the Negro League players here. And you can see the back. This is Charlie Kaiser. He was a pitcher. And it says that he was a pitcher in the United States with the Pittsburgh Crawford. And again, these came in candy. So these were candy issue cards versus some of the other ones that were more of issued in cigarettes. So just like in the United States, the Cuban cards were issued both in candy or cigarettes. And this is, again, a Caramelo de Portivo that were produced by a company called Felices. And they were in candy issues. And these, again, were made to be stuck on albums. And here's just a few of the cards here. This is another one of the Negro League players. This was Shiflene Clark. And again, it said here that he played with the New York Cubans in the United States. Then you have just a whole bunch of other guys here. And a lot of them, did play, like this guy here, Gilberto Torres. It says he played with the Washington Senators, amateur team, so in the minor leagues, the Washington Senators. Again, just a few guys. There's a whole set of these, and most of them, as you can see, they played in the United States, and also in most of them, if they were white, like this guy, probably played in the, he played in Williamsport, Mario Diaz, and if they were black, they were not allowed to play in the in the league. They had to play in the Negro leagues. So just some of these guys over here, and this guy played with the Cincinnati Clowns. Pedro Mendoza was a pitcher. So depending on how dark they were, whether they were considered that whether they were black or white, they either played in the Negro leagues or they played in the American leagues or the national, in the big leagues. And here's another one here. He was just a catcher, Ray Barrows, and he again played in New York. Many played with the New York Cubans. So those are some of the 45-46 Caramelo de Portivo. And some of the big name stars in the Caramelo de Portivo is, again, the best player in Cuban history, and that's Martin Dego. Martin Dego was considered, or is still considered, the best Cuban player. And just want to give a shout out to Scott for making me that beautiful drawing of Martin Dego, and that was just a great honor to have that. So this is Martin Dego's card from the Caramelo de Portivo, 1945-46. And he also appears in the 1946-47 and in the Propagandas Montiel cards. So again, these were also, mostly stuck on albums. And you can see here that he played for the Havana Club. And again, he also played in the United States in the Negro Leagues. And Martin Dego, if you don't know about him, he was, I would say the Ohtani of the day, but he was better than Ohtani because he played all 9 positions and he played them all well. And he also was the coach or the manager of the team, of the New York Cuban team during that time. And Martin Dego is the only player that is in 5 Hall of Fames in 5 different countries. He was the first Cuban player inducted in the United States Hall of Fame. Of course, he's in the Cuban Hall of Fame. He's in the Venezuelan Hall of Fame. He's in the Dominican Republic Hall of Fame. And he's in the Mexican Hall of Fame. And his big year was in 1938 in Mexico, where he was 18-2 as a pitcher. And he had a somewhere around a .9 under 1 ERA. And as a hitter that year, he batted .386. So he won, not only was he technically the Cy Young, the best pitcher, but he was also the best hitter. And I don't think that's been accomplished anywhere at any time in any league ever. And he played every position. He was great. He played catcher. He was extremely fast. He was about 6'3", 240 pounds. So he was a big player back in those days. Big guy, strong pitcher, and a big time hitter. And he's considered probably the best player. And Buck Leonard said that if he could take any player, he wouldn't take Babe Ruth, he wouldn't take Lou Gehrig, he wouldn't take Josh Gibson, he would take Martin Dego as the first player he would pick because of the versatility, the hitting, the power, the defense, and everything that Martin Dego brought to the game. Another Hall of Famer, Cuban Hall of Famer, is Minnie Minoso. And this is Minnie Minoso's rookie card from the 45-46 Caramelo de Portivo. And again, you can see Minnie here when he was very, very young and when he first started in the Cuban leagues. And this M is for Marianao, which was the team that he played for back in those days. And as you can see in the back, these were also stuck on albums. And that's why they're extremely, extremely thin. And it says on there that, he was playing professional ball here in the United States, started in the Negro Leagues, and then he was eventually one of the first Negro League players. And he is considered the Jackie Robinson of Latin America because he was the first Black Latino to play in the major leagues. After that, came Roberto Clemente and other players, but Minnie Minoso was really the groundbreaker. He was the one that started the black Latin players in the majors. Before many, there were no Latin players, black Latin players. You know, he came right after Jackie and Larry Doby. And it was difficult for Minnie Minoso because not only did was he black, but he didn't speak the language. So it was doubly hard for him. And in 1946, so this is the 1945-46, and then Caramelo de Portivo also created a 1946-47. And this is Minnie Minoso's 1946-47 Caramelo de Portivo. Now, this year, again, they were in candy, you know, just like a lot of these cards, either tobacco or candy issues. So this Cuban card is a lot tougher than the 45-46. They were produced in much less quantity. And most of the 45-46, as you can see, were portrait shots, but the 46-47 were mostly all, full body shots. And again, there's a Martin Dego in this set, plus a lot of other, Negro League players. And you can see Minoso here, in basically his second year, with the stadium in the background, and him, with his batting stance and with his uniform from the Marianao team. This is card number 84 in the set. The numbers were on the bottom here versus the numbers being over here. And the back of these are very similar. And I'll give you a good shot out of here. And it talks here about Orestes Minoso, infielder for the Marianao, and that he also played with the New York Cubans. And again, it talks about that you could get this with Caramelo de Portivo, produced by the Felices companies, and then it's got a sporting thing, and it says Casa Vasallo, which kind of was a sponsor of this, and it was a place that sold sporting goods. So again, these were candy issues from Cuba, and this is the Minnie Minoso, the second year card of Minnie Minoso, which is a lot tougher than the first year that I showed earlier. And Cuban cards were produced also throughout the 50s, and one of the issues produced in 1952 were these, the Victoria cards, the collection Victoria. And the Victoria cards, again, are pretty rare, and this is basically the rookie card of Camilo Pasqual. And it talks about him. He also played for the Marianao team, and it just gives his information about him. It has a nice little write-up on here. He said he debuted in 1951, and that he played in the United States, in New York, and in Big Spring, Abbeville. And it says that his brother, Carlos Patato Pasqual, also played. And again, these were for Colección Victoria. And these were issued in 1952. Here's another Victoria card here. And most of these are kind of, kind of action shots, not portrait cards, like some of the other ones. And this is another Cuban player here. And this is Isaac Sioni. And again, he played for the Havana team. And like many of these players, they did play in the United States, and some of them, and it says here that he played for Washington. And a lot of them played in minor league ball here, or they went on to play in the Negro leagues. And he was from the Havana team. So these are some examples of the 1952 Victoria cards. Very thin cards, virtually paper thin cards. And most of these, again, were made to be stuck on albums. Some of the last cards produced in Cuba were the 1956-57 Chicle Peloteros, and or Chico Pelotero, but Chicle means gum. So these were more candy issues, and this is the Camilo Pasqual from 1956-57. And after this, the Cuban Revolution took place in 1959. And once that happened and Fidel Castro came in, he took over all of the industries and all of the businesses there. So they didn't produce any more Cuban cards, after these. And you can see the back of this, and just kind of talks a little bit about Camilo Pasqual, where he was born and stuff like that, in Havana, that he played with Big Springs in the United States, and that he, in the league in Florida. So he played in Florida Class B until 1953. And then in 1954, he played for the Senators in Washington. And that's where his rookie card appears in 1955 Topps. Once he played for the Washington team with the American League on here, it says on there. So, unfortunately, after that year, after 1959, Cuban cards were no longer produced. But then they did start producing cards in Venezuela in 1959. And that's kind of where the history of the Latin or cards start in Venezuela right after that. So I wanted to give you guys a quick history of some of the Cuban issues and a little bit of the Cuban history, and just share some Cuban cards with you guys so you kind of get an idea of, the history of Cuba, the history of Cuban cards. Really like the United States. Cards were produced all the way through from 1909 all the way through I think it was 58 or 50, in the late 50s. So anyway, leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. There's a great article I'll let you know on the on Net 54 that really talks about the history of Cuba and how Cuban baseball was virtually, in some points, was even more advanced than the United States in the early 1900s, because they incorporated the Negro Leaguers and the blacks and the whites played together, where that wasn't available here in the United States until Jackie came along. So that's kind of a quick history, a quick look at some of these cards from Cuba. This is some of my Cuban card collection. Thanks for watching, guys. Have an awesome, awesome day. This is Orlando from A Collector's Dream, and I'll catch you on the next one.